Hi, and welcome to Chapter 7. And in this chapter, we're going to take a look at Japan's defeat in World War II. And we're going to try to answer this inquiry question. How far do you agree that the defeat of Japan could only have been brought about by the dropping of the atomic bomb? Okay, so in other words, could Japan be defeated without using the atomic bomb? Let's start off with the picture over here. Now, this picture shows the destruction of Hiroshima after the explosion of the atomic bomb. The only reason why this tall building is still standing is because the atomic bomb was detonated just before it reached the top of this dome, okay, causing massive shock waves everywhere. As you can see, the buildings surrounding it have all been almost flattened. Alright, let's take a look at a bit of a background on Japan's advancement in World War II. Now, when Japan attacked Pearl Harbor, they had also at the same time began invading several other countries as well in Southeast Asia. For example, they invaded the British colonies of Malaya, the Philippines, and Thailand. Okay, the British and American forces were caught off guard and retreated quite quickly. Okay, this encouraged the Japanese to think that they were very successful and that total victory was possible. Okay, as I've mentioned in the earlier chapter, Japan's plan was to take control of all the resources necessary to feed its military machine. Okay, so on this page 192 here, you basically see how Japan started attacking Southeast Asia at the same time they attacked Pearl Harbor. Pearl Harbor will be somewhere around here on this side, Hawaii, and at the same time they were attacking all these other countries. As you can see, it is very, 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 very widespread. The more popular ones that you remember would be Singapore. Okay, Singapore was unfortunately defeated because the British were too busy fighting Germany in Europe. Because remember, at the same time that this war is happening in Asia, there's another war that's going on in Europe. Now, in the Philippines, the American defense of the Philippines was based on a strategy of land and air defenses. Okay. However, half the US Air Force was destroyed during these Japanese air raids on Pearl Harbor. Okay, so these ships and planes that were in Pearl Harbor were supposed to help the Philippines, but unfortunately, they were destroyed by the Japanese. So, that's a bit of a background information for you. So we're going to start taking a look at the first reason why Japan was defeated, one factor to why Japan was defeated in World War II, which is the strength of USA. Okay, needless to say, America is and still is one of the most important and strongest superpowers there is. Now, Admiral Yamamoto, who had planned the attack on Pearl Harbor, had warned the Japanese leaders that Japan could expect early months of success but could not win a long war. This was because of USA's industrial capacity, which basically means America's ability to produce stuff. Okay, America was better able at producing stuff than any other country in the world, especially Japan. The USA would be able to rebuild its Pacific Fleet that was destroyed in Pearl Harbor and strike back with even greater force. Now, Japan underestimated USA's determination once it had been called to action for the Pearl Harbor attack. After Pearl Harbor, Americans sought revenge on the Japanese for doing such a horrible act. At the same time, the Japanese were gambling that Hitler's armies in Europe would be enough to distract America from going to war with Japan. When USA entered the war, Churchill and Roosevelt agreed that they should defeat Germany first, and once they did that, Japan would be next. The second part of that factor is one of USA's strengths was its economic strength. Okay, America was the largest industrial producer in the world. It was able to switch over from producing things like cars and other goods. It was able to switch it over to military production very quickly. Okay. On top of that, there were many unemployed people because of the Great Depression who were very willing to work. Okay, these willing citizens proved to be far better workers than the forced labor that was preferred by the fascists, such as Japan. Now, Japan did not have such a strong industrial foundation. It was not as strong as America in terms of being able to produce a lot of things. Okay, and this meant that as the war went on, any attacks by America would weaken Japan's economy even further. Okay. Contribution of women to the war effort is another strength of the USA. Now, in America, the government encouraged women to contribute to war effort. So there were women who produced things like weapons, vehicles, and military supplies required for the war. You must remember that in a war, all the males that used to be working in these factories are all used up to go to war. Okay, they are now working as soldiers. So there are large gaps in manpower in these factories. Some women even joined armed forces, serving as nurses and even soldiers. Japan, like Germany, if you recall, emphasized the role of women as mothers and childbearers. So these women were not fully utilized to help in the war. Okay, so that was one of Japan's weaknesses. Now, the third strength of USA was its military and naval strength. Okay, even though Japan attacked Pearl Harbor, it did not completely destroy all their ships. 3 aircraft carriers that were stationed in Hawaii were not at Pearl Harbor during the attack. Okay, they were somewhere else, so they did not get destroyed. There were also 3 key events that you need to remember, which proved that Japan had failed to break the USA's resolve, which means determination to do something. The 3 are the Doolittle Raid, the Battle of the Coral Sea, and the Battle of Midway. Now, I'll just go into brief detail about these 3 examples, and I'll show you some videos in class. Now, the Doolittle Raid was a very ambitious plan by the USA. It had actually planned to fly over Japan and land the bombers in China. Okay, even though they risked capture by the Japanese. 16 bombers took off from the aircraft carriers in the Pacific and bombed Tokyo, Nagoya, and Kobe in a single retaliatory surprise attack on 18th of April 1942, 4 months after the attack on Pearl Harbor. So it was a kind of a revenge attack. Battle of the Coral Sea is the second example. Japan basically planned to land its soldiers at Port Moresby to take control of New Guinea, okay, in order to, as a step to launching an attack on Australia. Okay, so New Guinea is here, so Japan actually planned to land in New Guinea so that they can attack Australia. Yeah. So what happened during the battle was, it, to cut a long story short, it turned out to be a draw, but the attack on the Japanese, the attack on the Port Moresby in New Guinea was cancelled because Japan could not guarantee the safety of its troops, which meant that even if Japan managed to reach Port Moresby, they would constantly be attacked by the Allied powers. So these are examples of uh, airplanes on an aircraft carrier. So this was where the battle took place. Yeah. Okay, the last one is the Battle of Midway. Midway is actually a name of islands, which was important because of its airfields, and their location on the route to Pearl Harbor. Okay, the Japanese wanted it to become a base for Japanese naval and air forces. Obviously, they want to have an airport as close as possible to the place that they are attacking, so they can easily send planes over to attack the territory that they want to attack. What happened was that the USA attacked the Japanese fleet with their dive bombers launched from their carriers, and basically the Japanese lost 4 of their aircraft carriers and nearly 3/4 of their experienced pilots. So this was a huge success for the Americans. So in addition to the 3 events, USA continued to show its military strength by continuously bombarding parts of mainland Japan, which is the parts of Japan which are occupied by people, by the civilians. This was made possible by capturing island bases such as the Philippines and Iwo Jima. Okay. So basically, when America had bombed mainland Japan, it actually caused a lot of destruction to the factories, and many of his workers did not want to work in such conditions and ran away. And this actually caused Japan's economy to fall. Okay, we now move on to the second factor which led to Japan's defeat, which was the ineffective defense of overextended Japanese empire. So Japan was very ambitious in wanting to occupy the whole of Southeast Asia. The problem was that it did not have enough soldiers or resources to defend these areas which they have occupied. Okay. Now, they struggled with the war effort with its limited funds, resources, and manpower. In contrast to that, the Allied forces had lots of resources and manpower, which allowed them to recover quickly from the Japanese attacks. Now, after the 3 examples which I talked about, the Coral Sea and Midway, there were other examples, 5 in fact, which actually highlighted Japanese defeats. Now, you do not need to remember all these examples in details, but rather the names of these battles will be more than sufficient. Okay, so I'll just focus on 2 popular ones, which is one of the more popular ones, which is Iwo Jima. If you search on YouTube, there's even a movie on that, a very good movie on that. The Americans wanted to build an airfield on Iwo Jima to launch and supply long-range bombers that could reach Japan and return safely. The aim was to devastate Japan's industry and economy through bombing. Okay, so just remember the names of these battles and you should be fine. Now, the third factor to why Japan was defeated was because of the Allied desire to secure a quick victory in the Asia Pacific. So, why a quick victory? We'll look at that in a short while. Now, Japan, in order to defend its empire, was forced to use forced labor and use kamikaze fighters. Okay. However, both these approaches actually worked against Japan and made the Allies want to defeat Japan even more quickly. So, kamikaze pilots, directly translated, means divine wind. It's used to refer to pilots who deliberately crash their planes on enemy camps or ships and killing themselves in their process. Something like suicide bombers. Yeah. Now, one reason why Japan was defeated was because the Allied powers really wanted to free these prisoners of war. Okay. Now, the Japanese used forced laborers from Korea to actually work for them, and one of the workers from Asia, thousands of workers from Asia were forced to work in construction projects such as the Thai-Burma Railway. And these forced laborers often worked in harsh conditions, were malnourished, and were even denied the most basic health facilities. Prisoners of war were used as forced laborers. Okay, there were about 100,000 captured in Singapore alone, and more than 27,000 American POWs were captured during the war. Now, many of these people were forced to work on Japanese construction projects. Okay. Now, one reason why the Allied powers were so keen and enthusiastic about defeating Japan so quickly was because the Japanese hostility towards the POWs were frequently highlighted in Allied propaganda. Okay, they came to know about this mistreatment of these POWs, and they use this as propaganda to get more and more people to support the war effort. So over here we have a gentleman, a British POW who worked on the Thai-Burma railway line. Now, so what were some of the conditions of this forced labor? Now, basically, laborers were forced to work without sufficient rest, food, or water. Okay, what was supposed to have taken 5 years to complete, the Japanese forced these POWs to complete it in 18 months, which is like 1.5 years. They were not even provided with proper equipment for construction. For example, when the shovels broke, they had to use their hands to dig. Anybody who attempted to escape were killed. It was estimated that close to 13,000 died of disease, hunger, or mistreatment. And because of this, the railway came to be known as the Railway of Death. Now, the Kapitai, something like the Nazi Gestapo, were Japanese secret police whose torture methods included pulling out fingernails, burning, water torture, electric shocks, forced kneeling on sharp instruments, and whipping. Okay, so the second part to why the Allies wanted to defeat the Japanese quickly was because of Allied losses from kamikaze attacks. Okay, now kamikazes are suicide bombers in today's modern terms. They were basically used to. These pilots would actually fly into enemy ships, okay, or factories to destroy them, and this actually caused quite a lot of damage. Okay, if you remember the 9/11 attacks on World Trade Center, that kind of destruction was caused by just one plane. So obviously the Allied powers were very worried about these kind of attacks because it would result in an extremely high number of casualties. So they were very motivated to end the war quickly. Alright, now the fourth and possibly the shortest factor of them all, the reason why Japan was defeated was because of Allied victory in Europe. Okay, once USA formally entered the war, Roosevelt and Churchill agreed that they should defeat Germany first. Now, Germany was the strongest, one of the strongest superpowers, and when the Allies finally defeated Germany, it was obvious that Japan would lose. Japan had lost its major partner. Okay, even before Germany's defeat in May 1945, it was obvious to the leaders of both Japan and the Allies that Japan could not hope to win the war. If Germany could not win the war, Japan was in no position to win the war either. So, now, this time round, the Allies demand for unconditional surrender. Now, what is unconditional surrender? Unconditional surrender basically means that Japan must accept defeat without conditions, and it will also mean Allies would occupy Japan and dictate peace terms. This would be especially humiliating and difficult to accept. This is not the Treaty of Versailles, because the Treaty of Versailles was not an unconditional surrender. And why they want to do this? This is because they wanted to make sure that it would not rise like Germany again. They feared that if Japan was humiliated by a peace settlement but remained control of its military, it would try to rise again to seek revenge and threaten its neighbors just like Germany did. As far as the Allies were concerned, it seemed that Japan was determined to never surrender. If you recall the Japanese cultural traditions, surrendering or backing down was considered to be very dishonorable and shameful. Now, last but not least, is the dropping of the atomic bomb. This is the last factor. Now, the dropping of the atomic bomb remains a controversy even today. As the war in Asia Pacific became more violent, the Americans were considering the use of the bomb to end the war. Okay, this would be more efficient instead of sending more ground troops against Japan, who would possibly be killed by the Japanese soldiers. But there was another reason for dropping the bomb, and that is to impress the Soviet Union as well as defeat Japan without Soviet help. Now, if you recall earlier on, the Soviet Union played a major role in freeing Europe, okay, and was occupying half of Europe when Germany surrendered. Also, do recall that the Allied powers, the Western powers, hate communism. In fact, they initially hated communism more than Nazism. So it tells you how strong they hate it. Stalin wanted a communist world order after end of World War II, while Churchill and Harry Truman, who's an American president which took over Roosevelt, wanted to contain the spread of communism. Stalin also demanded a share in the occupation of Japan, in the same way he had in the occupation of Germany. Now, moreover, America received reports that Soviet scientists were also working on similar nuclear projects. Therefore, the USA wanted to gain an edge over the Soviet Union by being the first to use the atomic bomb successfully. So now, we hear a museum in the US Air Force Museum, exact replicas of the atomic bombs that were dropped. Now, Albert Einstein once uh, actually wrote a letter to President Roosevelt after he discovered his formula E equals mc square formula, warning him that the same process could be used to produce a terrible weapon, which was the nuclear weapon. Now, on the 6th of August 1945, the American bomber Enola Gay flew over Hiroshima and dropped the atomic bomb Little Boy at 8:15 a.m. Now, a third of the city's population, over 66,000 people, women, children, including women and children, were killed instantly, okay, being evaporated by the incredible heat. 70,000 or more Japanese citizens were injured, and many of them died later. It also created a firestorm which incinerated everything within 7 kilometers where the bomb fell and destroyed 2/3 of the city's building in an instant. 30 minutes after the bomb dropped, black radioactive rain fell over the surrounding areas, poisoning more land and people. USA then announced to the world that it had discovered the atomic bomb and demanded that Japan surrender unconditionally. However, Japan still did not surrender immediately. So, on the 9th of August, 3 days later, USA dropped a second atomic bomb called the Fat Man on Nagasaki. Okay, here we see a picture of a Japanese foreign minister signing Japanese surrender on top of a naval ship. Okay, thousands more were affected by the long-lasting effects of the atomic bomb. Okay, and if you're wondering what some of the side effects of nuclear radiation is, it's nausea, vomiting, skin diseases, genetic mutations, hair loss, and cancer. And this finally ended. The war in the Asia Pacific finally ended on the 15th of August 1945 when Japanese Emperor Hirohito announced his country's unconditional surrender to the Allies. Alright, that brings us to the end of this chapter 7. I will summarize what we have covered so far in this chapter. First reason for Japanese defeat was American strength. America was strong in its economy. It was also strong because its women was able to contribute to the production process, and it was also strong militarily and in terms of its naval strength. Second factor is Japan's ineffective defense of an overextended empire. It had too little resources to defend the large area that it had conquered, and as a result of that, suffered key military defeats from 1942 to 1945. There are 5 examples of this, which we mentioned earlier. Third one was a desire of allies to secure a quick victory in the Asia Pacific because they wanted to free the POWs, and secondly because they wanted to minimize losses from kamikaze attacks. Fourth reason is Allied victory in Europe. Allied defeat of Germany meant that Japan would not stand a chance of winning the war. Okay, and because of that, the Allied powers demanded for unconditional surrender. Lastly was the dropping of atomic bombs. And those are the 5 factors that we have covered so far. Thank you for listening.